Hello and welcome to Global News Today with me, Michael Prendergast. And coming up in today's show, he's been called outspoken, even controversial, and even courageous. It's Dr. Aseem Malhotra, the cardiologist and advisor to US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's made global headlines after suggesting a link between COVID vaccines and rising cancer cases, including those within the UK royal family. He joins me to explain what he said and to respond to the backlash. Thank you so much for your time, Aseem. You've made a lot of global headlines over the past few days after your speech at Reform UK's conference, a party led by Nigel Farage, who are currently flying high in the polls at the UK at the moment. In a speech, you quoted Angus Dalgleish, a leading oncologist, who said, "It's highly likely that the COVID vaccines have been a factor, a significant factor, in the cancers of the members of the royal family." What has been your response to the backlash?
Thanks for having me on, Michal. So I think the first thing to mention is that the reason that that came up is my talk was about how to make Britain healthy again. And the ultimate conclusion is that we will not solve the healthcare crisis until we correct commercial distortions of the scientific evidence. And what leading people to that ultimate quote was based upon the fact that the highest level of evidence revealed more harm than good from the COVID mRNA vaccines. And this is the reason why in America recently, Robert Kennedy Jr. and the US administration have canceled $500 million worth of investments into mRNA technology for vaccines. The chief medical officer within HHS, Stephen Hatfield, in an interview regarding the analysis that led to that decision, mentioned the fact that the mRNA vaccine is having lots of really detrimental effects on the body, short, medium, long term, including interfering with tumor suppressor genes. So for a doctor hearing that, automatically what that means is there is a suggestion from that one of the reasons that they have decided to stop this technology investment is because it may be causing cancer. And that really is replicated for quite some time now, at least a year or two. Professor Angus Dalgleish, who is one of Britain's most published and eminent oncologists, he was behind the original discovery that CD4 cells were involved in HIV. He's also an immunology background. He's very unique. He has been talking about the fact that, certainly from an observation to start with, in many of his patients who've had cancer, who went into remission, almost all of them who had boosters were having relapses. And he then discovered there were many different mechanisms of harm, which are well published in the literature now, of potential mechanisms of how the mRNA technology can cause cancer. He said that many of his colleagues around the world in many different countries are seeing the same thing. So you've got published evidence, you've got mechanism of harm, we've got clearly people are aware that there has been an increase, certainly in many countries that are highly vaccinated, in cancer incidence in young people in particular. So I felt that it was important to mention this, and he asked me specifically to say that he felt, given the fact that, you know, the whole world is still quite shocked with the fact that several members of the royal family, although I didn't name them, but you know who they are, have developed cancer, you know, which did seem out of keeping with what you would expect their health to be, especially some of the younger members of the family. So that was important for me to mention because that was part of the reason why they banned the technology in the USA. And of course, one of my roles is advising MAHA Action, and I have a long-standing, professional and friendly relationships with Robert Kennedy Jr., Jay Bhattacharya, head of NIH, senior scientists in NIH, people at HHS, FDA. I'm in constant, regular communication with these people. So that was the reason for making that statement.
Wes Streeting, who is the Health Secretary in the UK, he called it shockingly irresponsible for Reform to allow you to speak at their conference. How do you respond?
It's interesting. Wes Streeting, I think he said something around the use of the word of poisonous lies, which of course is defamatory, and unfortunate that he would say that. To give him the benefit of the doubt, there's actually an interesting historical incident that there are parallels with Wes Streeting's comment, which is, of course, that he didn't say that he'd seen my whole speech. He was responding to a media reaction. So I can almost certainly guarantee you that Wes Streeting has not even heard the talk, which is unfortunate for him to then make such a comment. But a few years ago, in 2019, the Mail on Sunday did what can only be described at that point as a real hatchet job on myself and two other scientists, one a GP, the one a nutrition scientist, Zoe Harcum, was a nutrition scientist, and Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, and myself, where we were accused in the newspaper of spreading deadly propaganda around statins, cholesterol-lowering drug. And ultimately, there was a libel claim brought by Zoe Harcum and Malcolm. I decided not to get involved for a number of reasons. My mum had just died. I didn't think it was worth it. I wanted to carry on my campaigning and just take it on the chin. But the editorial in that newspaper said there's a place belongs in hell for doctors who say statins don't work. Not that we ever said that, so this is also misleading. But what made the headlines is that Matt Hancock, who was Secretary of State for Health at the time, he had been used clearly by the Mail on Sunday to say that essentially there's no place in the NHS for people like these or these lies, which is almost similar to what Wes Streeting said, which is quite interesting. Now, what emerged in the case is that Matt Hancock, I had met him a week earlier in Parliament when I went there to give a talk about how type 2 diabetes can be put into remission through a low carbohydrate diet. I gave him a copy of my book, The Piopi Diet. I had a good rapport with him. And as soon as his story came out, I messaged Matt and I said, Matt, I said, what's going on here, this story? And he said, Aseem, I had no idea they were referring to you. So think about that for a second, Michal. The Mail on Sunday had basically gone to Matt Hancock, hadn't named who these people were, probably said something which was taken out of context. He responded to something which was misleading. And then that becomes a story where we are then essentially libeled. And they won the case. And it was reported in the BMJ last year that Zoe Harcum and Malcolm Kendrick won that libel case. So this is a warning, by the way, to all journalists who are watching this, who have been involved in this particular situation, what can go wrong. And this is what I see has happened with Wes Streeting. It's an unfortunate comment. But the bigger issue is this, Michal. We have a massive problem right now of what I describe as a pandemic of vaccine injured, based upon best available evidence, that has been analyzed by independent scientists. I mean that independent drug industry influence. And that has also, played out in the United States with this recent directive, which I mentioned earlier on the mRNA. And this is not going away. And to attack those who are exposing this with good evidence in a measured way and mislabel them and smear them, what it does is it undermines the credibility in the media that are doing this, the legacy media, which is already on the way down, right? And this isn't good. We don't want legacy media to lose trust. We want good journalism. This is one of the main reasons, in my view, there's been a big rise in alt media, is because people ultimately see through this, and that alt media then has a bigger influence. And certainly when it comes to the US election, I have no doubt that the likes of Joe Rogan and Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson, Russell Brand, the people who have been giving people a more complete picture through their platforms, that has made people lose trust as well, contributed to further loss of trust in the legacy media because people are seeing greater truth. And that ultimately helped influence win Donald Trump the election by the margin that he won it by, because Robert Kennedy Jr. joined him. So I don't think this is a good thing because it creates more distrust in the establishment. And also one of the things that has, I've been accused of separately or been asked by is that, or people like me who are raising safety concerns about the vaccine. I'm not anti-vax, I'm pro-vaccine safety, I'm pro-good science, I'm pro-ethical evidence-based medical practice in keeping with General Medical Council guidelines on informed consent. This is what I'm an advocate for, is that the real danger here, and this has been shown, is that when you are not honest and open when things go wrong, in particular around concerns of negative side effects of vaccine, and there's published literature on this, the people that withhold the information, they lose trust, increases anger, and the way to combat this, to sustain trust and reduce even fueling conspiracy theories, is to be honest and open when the information becomes available.
You spoke about Wes Streeting, that he smeared you. He also said that your remarks are dangerous extremism. Is it dangerous for him to actually say that?
Yeah, what's interesting is one of the things the irony in all of this, and people must please go and watch the talk. Ensure there's a link, for example, when you put this out for people to watch it. Okay, you can judge for themselves. I don't believe people are stupid. They're intelligent enough when presented with all the information to make their own conclusions. 18-minute talk. In the talk, I used published, well-established academic literature on how big corporations exert their power to control a narrative. And one of the ways, of course, they do it is by influencing and capturing the media. And we know they've done that through the pandemic. Rochelle Walensky, for example, one of the former senior people of the CDC, once she left her role, said that her optimism from the COVID vaccine came from a CNN news report. Okay, so the media has a very powerful role to play, even influencing the minds and thoughts of people in senior health policy positions.
And what Wes said, is it dangerous? Is it dangerous for politicians to come out with these sweeping statements without having the research?
I think it is. But also the point I was going to make, Michal, is one of the ways that big corporations exert their power is through a mechanism called opposition fragmentation. So what that means is to stop this information getting out of people who genuinely have good science behind them, have integrity, care about patients, to expose the shortcomings of the drug industry and, for example, harms of various medications, lack of informed consent, is that there are character assassinations that happen. So for me, this response from Wes Streeting, and he may not be aware of it, is that ultimately he's being played by these corporate influences that are there to try and undermine the credibility of people like me, so they sustain the status quo. But it's not working anymore because we've got other means of communication. The trust is declining. And just, I also take it as a backhanded compliment. One of my inspirations is Mahatma Gandhi, who, of course, effectively and rightly, advocated non-violent resistance, okay, to unjust, unethical laws, for example. And Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. So for me, taking a step back, dispassionately, this is all predictable in many ways. But the point is, it's got out there. There was a standing ovation at the Reform Conference. Many people there came up to me, were really, I think, moved by my speech, because it's very clear when you watch it. And the irony is I almost predicted through my speech this was what was going to happen. This is following the corporate playbook, adopted initially set up by Big Tobacco, right? You've got to remember that for 50 years, they avoided any real regulation on cigarette consumption, 50 years from when there was links between smoking and lung cancer, by planting doubt, confusing the public, buying the loyalty of scientists, and outright denial, to the extent that in 1994, the level of that denialism was they swore under oath in front of US Congress that they did not believe that smoking causes lung cancer or nicotine was addictive. And, part of their strategy was to get doctors to endorse cigarettes, Michal. We're seeing history repeat itself in many ways with big pharma in general. And a lot of this is groupthink. I have no doubt in my mind, 99.99% of doctors are well-meaning. They're intelligent people. They want to do best for their patients. But one of the shortcomings or vulnerabilities within the medical profession is it is hierarchical and obedient, which is a risk factor for abuse of power. And that power is being exerted more than ever by big corporations who are pathologically self-interested when it comes to making money. And I made the point, for example, that Pfizer, in the summer of 2021, by that stage, there was evidence showing that the COVID vaccine had no significant effect on preventing from infection. Even Pfizer admitted they did do the studies to show it was not preventing transmission. And at that stage, we did have evidence from yellow card reports from VAERS system in the United States that the vaccine was causing significant harm, and certainly at that stage, at the very least, killing people, maybe in small numbers at that point in time. We know it's probably significant now. I mentioned, certainly if you go back to square one, it is highly likely, at a bare minimum, in the short term, that the COVID mRNA vaccines have either caused serious harm or killed millions of people around the globe.
Anti-vaxxer is a term that's often used by your opponents to criticize you. Do you think the term has been weaponized, and how do you respond to people out there who call you a conspiracy theorist?
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, I think anti-vaxxer has been weaponized. And I tweeted out today, asking the question, should those that use the term anti-vaxxer be arrested
Should
as
they?
a form of hate speech? As a form of hate speech, let me finish. Especially if they use that term against people who have been vaccine injured, who have lost a relative or child as a result of the COVID vaccines. It's quite disgusting and it's quite shameful at the very least, Michal. And I think we need to start calling it out. I myself have been diagnosed by a doctor. This is not something it didn't come from me, this came from them. And I was initially shocked, but it made sense to me, of being vaccine injured because the COVID vaccine has been shown from research to obliterate, and certainly some people, and it happened with me, one of the most important gut bacteria called bifido, okay? And mine was at 0. And I had symptoms because I had a flare-up of an autoimmune condition. I'm still dealing with it. It's getting worse slowly, unfortunately, which is psoriasis. I had clinical depression. Of course, I've had a lot of tragedy in my life. That can also be part of it, but that can also explain why you get depression as well. So I'm vaccine injured. My father, who died, in my view, almost certainly as a result of the COVID vaccine that he'd taken 6 months earlier through a mechanism of accelerating heart disease, had a cardiac arrest, is also a victim of vaccine injury. So those people who are, they need to think a little bit more of who they are using this term against. One of somebody I know who was also a patient of mine, who's been very public, a very powerful advocate standing up for vaccine injured, is a man called John Watts from Scotland. And he was described, he very boldly questioned Rishi Sunak about the fact that the vaccine injured have been forgotten, if you like, on a debate that was featured by Sky News last year. And I won't name this person, people can look it up, but there was a well-known, respected broadcast, he's a journalist for the Daily Mirror. And in response to that, he talked about this anti-vaxxer heckling Rishi Sunak. This man has been debilitated quite significantly for long periods of time from vaccine injury. So therefore, I want to repeat this. Use of this term anti-vaxxer is unhelpful, and I think it is disgusting and it is shameful.
You're an advisor to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is currently the US Health Secretary. He called the COVID vaccine the most deadly in history. Is the US more open to your views than the UK?
I think yes and no. I think among large sections of the American population and politicians, it is very much open. Of course, you've seen, I've been on so many podcasts from Rogan to Megyn Kelly to Tucker, who have all been very supportive and sympathetic to the message that I have advocated for, which again, let me repeat this, Michal. I am an advocate, and I would say obsessively so, for ethical, evidence-based medical practice and informed consent. Let me repeat that. Ethical, evidence-based medical practice and informed consent. And that also means that you have to come and speak from a place of integrity. In the UK, I had to sign essentially an oath when I was a trustee of the King's Fund, prestigious organization. I served a full term for them for 6 years, that influences government health policy, to say that I would adhere to the 7 Nolan principles of public life, which are basically should be adhered to by anyone who has a role in public life, which means teachers, doctors, the police, and politicians. And I know off by heart what those 7 principles are: selflessness, objectivity, integrity, accountability, honesty, openness, and leadership. When I gave a speech in the House of Commons dining area for the Global Health Awards, where I received an award a couple of months ago for excellence in public health communication, I was honored to receive that. I gave a keynote speech talking about the harms of the COVID vaccine and the problems with the healthcare crisis. And I asked the audience there, and there were politicians there were doctors, leading doctors there were members from the pharmaceutical industry there. And I said to them, can anyone here name the 7 Nolan principles? There was one person actually that put their hand up, okay? Only one person. This should be the forefront of our consciousness. I said in my talk that the problem, one of the reasons is collectively positions of leadership, even amongst the public, but certainly people have, in positions of responsibility, is that we have deviated from a baseline of integrity. And the reason for that, the root cause for that, is a system that has been corporatized. And in this case, we have a tyrannical corporatized big pharma entity, unfortunately, that is out of control. And everything we are seeing being played out now in terms of the backlash and the conflict is, in my view, as a result of that.
How can you win against big pharma?
We have a gross injustice going on. I believe in freedom of speech and democracy. And ultimately, my aim is to help my individual patients and improve population health. So one is, first of all, an understanding that medical knowledge is under commercial control, but most doctors know that, so we make it exposed. And then things will change accordingly, where we have to remove commercial conflicts of interest over health policy and medical decision-making. How do we do that? As Gandhi taught us, my inspiration in many ways, continue to make the injustice visible. And that's what we're doing. That's what you are doing right now by giving me an opportunity to respond to all of the media frenzy and shoddy journalism, let's call it out for what it is, across many mainstream newspapers in the last few days.
Speaking of that, Aseem, it was Ed Balls, the former Shadow Chancellor of the UK. He said he was flabbergasted by you. What's your response to Ed Balls?
You know what was interesting? I'm glad you've raised that. Is that this was on Good Morning Britain, and they didn't name me, which was interesting, okay? Good Morning Britain, by the way, who follow me on X, they have come to me over several years. I've been one of their so-called favorites as doctors to come and talk about health issues. In 2020, I was the one who suggested Boris Johnson likely got admitted to hospital with COVID because of his weight. It became a big story. And ultimately, Boris Johnson agreed with that. I said this has likely played a role from all the analysis of the research I'd done, but it was quite obvious to me. In 2021, February, Good Morning Britain, Ed Balls, if you're watching this, you probably don't know this, utilized me to help tackle vaccine hesitancy for the COVID vaccine. I'd had 2 shots myself. I went there to help tackle vaccine hesitancy amongst people from ethnic minority backgrounds. So it looks quite odd. Let me be honest, I'm not here to criticize Good Morning Britain. There's a lot of good people there. I have a friendship, I would say, with Susanna Reid. You know, we WhatsApp each other. You know, she's asked me for medical advice in the past, okay? She's an excellent journalist. But the point here is for Ed Balls, it really probably makes him look ridiculous. And I think if he sees this interview, he's probably going to be very, very embarrassed.
We're just out of time. Dr. Aseem Malhotra, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Michal.